And in this session of this series of anatomy videos, we'll discuss the developmental basis of the functions of the cranial nerves and their distribution in the brainstem during development. So that is the title of this session, a developmental background. Before going to this distribution and the functions of the cranial nerves, we have to revise the end of the third week of gestation as far as the germinal disc. On the left side, that is the gross appearance of the third week germinal disc, and on the right side, that is the cross-section, transverse section in such disc. Here you can find the middle line where the notochord, the primitive streak, and the primitive node. The notochord on this side here, and on each side of notochord there is three divisions of the intra-embryonic mesoderm. Here the three layers of the third week embryo or disc, that is the ectoderm, the endoderm, and in between this is the intra-embryonic mesoderm parts, which is divided into a paraaxial mesoderm, a column which is divided into mesodermal somites, that is the mesodermal somites here, on each side of that is the neural tube, the neural crest, which develops from the ectoderm. In the intermediate line here, the medial part, this is what we call it the nephrogenic cord, which is the intermediate mass of the intra-embryonic mesoderm. Here we can see both of them, the nephrogenic cords. Then the lateral cell mass, or the intra-embryonic coelom, this will end up as a mass by different cavities which will coalesce to form a single cavity. Over here, that's the single cavity which you call it the intra-embryonic coelom. That intra-embryonic coelom is most cranial part. This is the precordial plate, and this is the cloacal membrane. This is the tail end. As you can see, it is U-shaped in appearance, so it is divided in the middle line to form a pericardium. On each side, above the pleura, the two of them, and the two recesses of the peritoneum, with a part of the mesoderm left most cranially called the septum transversum. So that is the septum transversum, the most cranial part here. Then, as we said, that is the notochord, that is the neural tube with the neural crest on each side. This is the yolk sac, which will end up as the primitive gut. The end of that area here will be the amnion. So that's the two cavities, the yolk sac, and outside is the amnion. The yolk sac here, that is the ectoderm as we said, and this is the endoderm, and this is what we call it the somatomesoderm, somatic or somatopleur. The intra-embryonic coelom have two layers, a layer very close to the endoderm, which we call a splanchnic mesoderm, and a layer very close to the ectoderm, which we call it the somatic mesoderm or somatopleur. That is the parietal layer. And the inner one is what we call it the splanchnic mesoderm. It is a visceral layer which will form the layers of the organs of the abdomen and parts of the other areas in the organs of the body. So we have to concentrate on these two layers, the splanchnopleur, which is this one with the endoderm, and somatopleur and the ectoderm, this one. Now we have to describe or to see the different types of the cranial nerves when it comes to functions. It is an efferent group and afferent group. So you got a motor and sensory types. When it comes to the efferent or the motor type, both is divided in somatic part or somatic group and visceral group. The somatic will be another type or another group which we call general somatic efferent fibers. The visceral have two groups, a special and the general visceral efferent fibers. We'll come to know the meaning of each of them. When it comes to the sensory, it is again visceral and somatic. Each of them is divided into general and special. So you have 4 groups of sensory and 3 groups of motor. Those 3 groups or the 7 groups here, 3 of motor and 4 of sensory, are arranged in the brainstem from medial to lateral, starting the most medial is number 1 and the most lateral is number 7. Here is the beginning of understanding the meaning of each of these 7 columns. The general somatic efferent or motor fibers are those fibers supplying the muscle which does not arise from the pharyngeal arches. Simply, they are the muscles of the eye and the tongue. That is the meaning of general somatic efferent. While special visceral efferent fibers are those fibers supplying the muscles developing from the pharyngeal arches. That is the difference. The third group, which is general visceral efferent, are fibers supplying structures developing from the splanchnic mesoderm, splenic part or splenoblur, and from the endoderm. And this is the group which you call them parasympathetic nerves. In the sensory, we have the first group, general visceral efferent fibers, and those fibers will carry the sensation from the different organs which arise again from the mucous membranes or the splanchnic mesoderm. And these what we call them interoceptives. The interoceptive, the bane of the viscera from inside. The fifth will be the special visceral efferent fibers which carry the smell and the taste. And these organs are covered by endodermal mucous membranes. So they belong to the viscera. So the special visceral efferent smell and taste. The sixth group is the general somatic, somatopleur. Those fibers carrying sensation from those structures develops from the ectoderm or the somatoblur, somatic mesoderm, and this is what we call them the interoceptives. The last one is another somatic, which is the special somatic efferent fibers, which carry sensation from the organs which develop from ectoderm. This is the vision and hearing, the eye and the ear. So in the sensory, we have 2 visceral and 2 somatic. The visceral general is the interoceptives. The somatic general is the exteroceptives. The special visceral is the smell and taste, and the special somatic is the vision and the hearing. That is the meaning of each of these terms. Now we have to know the cranial nerves under each of these 7 columns. The general somatic efferent fibers will be the 3rd, the 4th, and the 6th for the eye, and 12 for the tongue. While the special visceral efferent, which supply the muscles arising from the pharyngeal arches, the first arch, the 5th, the 2nd, the 7th, the 3rd, the 9th, while both 4th and 6th arches from the vagus and the accessory, the cranial part of accessory. The parasympathetic fibers, or the general visceral efferent, are found in 4 cranial nerves. the third, the seventh, the ninth, and the tenth. That is the motor part. The sensory part is the general visceral afferent fibers, which are the interoceptives, facial, glossopharyngeal, and vagus, while those of special visceral afferent, the first is the smell, while the taste by the seven, the ninth, and the tenth. That for general somatic afferent, the exteroceptives, mainly by the trigeminal, helped by the glossopharyngeal and the vagus. The last, which is the special somatic afferent fibers, are carried by the second, which is the optic, the eighth, which is the vestibulocochlear for the hearing. Now, if you look at that distribution, you can collect or gather the deep origin or the function of each of the 12 cranial nerves. If, for example, we choose the facial nerve, special visceral afferent, general visceral afferent, general visceral efferent, parasympathetic, and it is the arch, the nerve for the second arch, special visceral efferent, and so on. You can choose any nerve and know the function from these groups. Now, what are the nuclei which give origin to the cranial nerve in each of these 7 columns? For each cranial nerve, we should know the function number 1 and the deep origin, which is the nuclei, and the position of this deep origin when it comes to the origin of the cranial nerve. Then we'll talk about the superficial attachment, the intracranial course, the foramen of exit, the extracranial course, and the distribution. Here, the first column, which is the general visceral afferent, each nucleus takes the name of the nerve. So, motor nucleus of oculomotor, of trochlear, of abducent, and of the hypoglossal. But in the special visceral efferent, the trigeminal and the facial have the same name of the nerve itself, but the 9th, the 10th, and the cranial part of 11, all of them arise from the nucleus ambiguous. When it comes to the third, the parasympathetic general visceral efferent, for the third, Edinger-Stovall nucleus, for the 7th, superior salivatory or salivary nucleus, for the 9th, the inferior nucleus, and for the vagus, the dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus, that is the motor part or motor nuclei. When it comes to the sensory, for the general visceral afferent, the 3 of them will go to the nucleus of tractus solitarius, that is the interoceptives. For the special visceral afferent, the nucleus of tractus solitarius will receive also the facial, glossopharyngeal, and vagus, but the smell will have its own pathway. When it comes to the general somatic afferent, the exteroceptives, there is the nucleus of the spinal tract of trigeminal for the 3 of them, the trigeminal, the glossopharyngeal, and the vagus. But for the trigeminal only, the main sensory nucleus and the mesencephalic nucleus. The last one, special somatic, both vision and hearing have their own pathway. So by now we know the types, the distribution in 7 columns, and the nuclei of each of those in the 7 columns. Now, the developmental stages of the cranial nerves will start by an early spinal cord and early brainstem. Early spinal cord will have 2 ala. The alar lamina, which is sensory, here and here, and basal lamina in the spinal cord and the brainstem. When it comes to more developed brainstem, the alar lamina, which is the sensory, will divide into the 4 columns of the sensory. The basal lamina, which is the motor, will divide into the 3 columns of the motor fibers. So we'll take them from lateral to medial, the special somatic afferent, then the general somatic afferent, then the special visceral afferent, the general visceral afferent, and lastly, that is the 4 sensory. While the 3 motor will start the most lateral, the general visceral afferent, special visceral afferent, and the general somatic afferent is the last one. So that is the arrangement of those breakdown of the alar lamina and the basal lamina. Now, the distribution of the nuclei in each of the medulla, bones, and midbrain when it comes to the position of the location of each of these nuclei. We'll start by the motor part, the 3 parts, where the general somatic of the 12 is in the medulla, of the 6 is in the bones, the 4th and the 3rd are found in the midbrain. For the special visceral afferent fiber, the 3, the 9th, the 10th, and the 11th are in the medulla, while those of the 5th and the 7th are found in the bones. Those general visceral efferent fibers for the vagus and glossopharyngeal are found in the medulla, for the 7th in the bones, for the 3rd it is found in the midbrain. That is the motor part. When it comes to the sensory part here, this general visceral afferent fibers for the glossopharyngeal and the vagus are in the medulla here. The general visceral afferent of the 7th are present in the bones, while the special visceral afferent fibers for the 9th and the 10th are found in the medulla. Those of the facial are found in the bones. The general somatic afferent fibers are found in the medulla for the 9th and 10th. For the 5th, it is found in the medulla. But for this special nerve, the 5th nerve, the nuclei are distributed in the 3 regions, as we will come to know when describing the trigeminal nerve. That is the distribution of the nuclei, the motor, and the sensory within the cranial nerve during development. Thank you for your attendance and your listening, and I hope it will help you. Thank you again.